Hello and welcome to part number 3 of this video series where I talk about violence in social life, specifically violence between the men. And just to be clear, this is a rare occurrence, but if you do go out a lot and you approach 100, maybe 500 people over a period of a year or two, you will run into some violent situations, mostly of the type that we discussed in the last video where we talked about threats and intimidation. But 1 out of 1,000 interactions on average, at least that's the data that I have from my own life, can turn into actual confrontation, physical, forceful confrontation. And so today we will dive into that edge where we are crossing the line into actual violence. And most people are just super scared of that happening, and it's understandable. And for that reason, a lot of people just don't feel comfortable going to a lot of social venues or nightclubs at all. And then when there's a tiny bit of conflict, they run away immediately. Now, we want to be different. We want to know what can happen in those situations. And that's why I invite you to watch this video to understand exactly how you can deal with these tricky and violent situations and face them skillfully. Not like an idiot who says, yeah, let's fight. Because when you know how to deal with those situations, those tense moments will actually become enjoyable for you. You'll start to see a bit of pleasure in that thrill. Obviously, only when it's necessary. I mean, we don't look for fights. We don't want to go into fights. But sometimes troublemakers are really asking for it. They're looking for trouble and they come to you. And I want to share 2 stories that I recently experienced here in Berlin with clients of mine and tell you what I learned from those. The first one is where a guy that I work with, he's still at the beginning of his process and still a bit shy. He walked up to a woman at a train station and he didn't really know what to say. He wasn't also particularly attracted to the woman. I basically told him to talk to her and that's why he did it. And he just said something like, yeah, what's up? Do you know where there's a good pizza place? And the woman could sense that he was not being authentic. It's one of the many reasons not to use made-up pretenses to talk to women. But she was really quite suspicious, and she immediately asked him, hey, are you doing this as some kind of pickup artist challenge? And he was like, no, whatever. And after 20 seconds, the conversation was over. He came back to me, and we walked on. A minute later, that woman returns to us across the street, led by this dude, pretty tall, big guy, and he just walks right into us. And the woman is actually holding him back a little bit, but he just walks right into my client and stands pretty close, like 20 centimeters away from him. And I'm just standing there, what the hell is going on? And he starts screaming at my client, saying, you idiot, what the hell are you doing? Get lost. I said, man, what's your problem? What's going on? And he said, I'm not talking to you. I said, well, you're talking to my friend over here. It means you're kind of talking to me as well. And he didn't know English very well, so he was just insulting my client in broken English. It was a bit cute to actually hear that. But at some point he said something. He said, I'm gonna rip your effing head off. And when he said that, I realized that this is actually a very dangerous situation. And well, my gut reaction was to match his tonality and start getting a bit more rough rather than questioning him. Hey, what are you doing? What's going on? I said, hey man, no ripping of heads is going to happen here, okay? I told him we're in the land of peace. And funnily enough, there was a diversity, equity, and inclusion flag hanging above our heads in that moment on a balcony. So I pointed to that and I said, hey, this is the land of diversity, okay? And he said something like, I live here, insinuating that he felt that my client, being an Indian, didn't have the right to approach a woman. And I said to him, well, I live here too, okay? There's no ripping off heads. Eventually the girl pulled him away and she said, yeah, if you want to learn how to talk to women, that's not the way. And I said to her, well, then tell us what's the way. She said, no, I'm not going to teach you that. So again, it ended up not escalating into full-on physical touch, but it came very close. And in hindsight, I realized that there were two mistakes that I did. First, I let him come extremely close, and that's a danger. This is a random stranger. You don't know what kind of person he is, and he shouldn't be able to come within 20 centimeters of your face. If he's clearly threatening violence, you have to take a step back, hold your arm out, if necessary, push him away, and say, hey man, keep distance, okay? Because him entering your personal space like that is already an act of violence. And you have to defend yourself against that. Now, obviously, you could just run away in these kinds of situations and just run for your life. That's obviously going to destroy your self-worth. It's going to hurt your pride, and it's also going to let bullies like this free rein. So I don't recommend you do that if they're not clearly like immediately punching you, which will happen in some of the next stories that I'll share in this series. If they're coming in with rude words and language and even coming too close, the first step is to take a step back and to hold out your arms to keep the distance, to be in a safe distance. And then the second mistake that I did was I was actually standing there with my phone. I just had it, and most people have their phone and very handy anyways right away. And I could have immediately recorded the whole situation. I think that would have been a smart move, because when he's threatening violence, that is a point where you're absolutely justified to pull out your phone and start filming the thing while you're still talking to the guy. Especially if you're two people, like in this case. One person can be dealing with the guy, the other can kind of step back a little bit more and film. Because obviously filming can provoke them, but they obviously have no right to privacy when they're threatening someone with violence. Also, if you don't want to hold up your phone because you know it's going to provoke them too much, you can just do an audio recording. Even that would be extremely valuable for any court proceedings, police proceedings that could ensue if he decides to actually use violence. And the third option is to give the phone to someone else. When there's a violent commotion like this in public, a few people will stop and you could just tell one of them, hey, take my phone, film this please. So that you and the other person that is more involved in the conflict are both fully able to respond and not at risk of losing a phone or getting into trouble because you pull out the phone. There's another example where this kind of evidence would have been extremely useful, but I wasn't able to think of that in the moment. It was much more nasty and shocking. This was at an open air festival. I went there with a client, and at the beginning, again, my clients are usually a bit rusty, so I tell them to just go and talk to 5 people, even if they're not particularly interested, just to warm up the social muscle. And so my client did that with the woman that I had pointed out. And after just 5 seconds, I could see him turn around and kind of come back to me pretty quickly. And he said, no, this girl, she's not in the mood. She's like crying, literally. I said, okay, whatever. We walked on. 20 seconds later, this guy jumps in front of us, bold, mid-aged, leather jacket, starts screaming at us in some foreign language and immediately spits into my client's face. My client goes like in disbelief, and I also look at this guy. I'm not sure what to do. I'm stunned in that moment. It turns out that this guy was together with the woman, and the woman was actually standing right next to that situation, and they were a couple, but they just had a fight, and apparently they were separated by 10 meters in a bit of a grudge, but he obviously saw when my client approached his partner, and that was the response he thought fit. Now, this is a huge provocation, obviously. When you get spit in the face, I mean, that's a real act of violence here. And there are different options. What do you do in that situation? I mean, it's not an actual physical threat. It's just a humiliation. So kind of punching the guy and starting an actual fight is not exactly the right response. It's not the appropriate, the proportional level of violence. The only thing that would be proportional is spitting him back in the face, which is also something as a civilized person I and my client didn't want to do. So we were just standing there, and I'm starting to scream at him saying, what the hell? Why? What's wrong with you? And because we didn't know what else to do, and at the end we just kind of moved away from there. a bit scared as well, because we didn't want to get into a fight with that dude. And people were around, but it didn't seem like they were really coming in to intervene. And so here again, it would have been better to pull out a phone or to give a phone to someone around and say, hey, film this. And then you can actually confront the guy verbally. And with the documented evidence that you have, you can then report him. And I think this is a situation where for the first time in this video series, it's absolutely appropriate to actually report to the police and press charges. That's how conflicts and violations are dealt with in the civilized way when people go completely out of bounds. So to summarize my advice here for this level of violence where actual physical confrontation is at least initiated and provoked, you want to keep distance, avoid escalation, de-escalate, but also defend yourself verbally. Then, if you have the chance, try to record whatever happens afterwards. In part 4 of this video series, which is coming up next, we'll reach a sort of climax and look at the next escalation level of violence, where the punches and kicks are just flying right away and you don't have any time to do any sort of diplomacy or hedging any bets. You have to just protect yourself as fast as possible. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in that video. Subscribe to this channel if you want to get notified when it gets released. Samgachat Vam. Namaskar.